right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I am Nick Lichtenberg, business editor at Fortune Magazine / Fortune Media, because we have a big web presence as well these days. Not to talk about myself, that's not what I'm here to do, but I was in the Wall Street Journal last night, which is a very strange experience for a journalist to be the subject of a story. But it was about AI displacement, so this is very well timed. I personally use AI tools in our newsroom, and I'm one of the first journalists to sort of come out that way and be the face of that. And so it's great to be invited here to talk to Bhaskar and Johnny about the American AI Jobs Risk Index, which was a partnership between Society for Human Resource Management and the Tufts School. But it's the big story. It's the big story in business, this AI doomsday thing that we've been hearing about, fears from very smart people, all the top experts, the people I talk to for a living, that the AI wave is here and it's getting a little freaky. It's getting a little scary. And so there's all sorts of great research and thought leadership being done on this subject. But this index is particularly interesting because it drills down into geographical regions, and it isolates the certain cities and the certain metro areas that are really at risk here. And it's fitting that we're in Massachusetts today because this state is one of the most exposed to disruption. And the big takeaway from the report, which I've been reviewing in preparation for this, is the wired belt as the new rust belt.
Right.
And that means, in my notes here, it says California, Texas, New York, Florida, and Illinois. That's 4 out of 10 AI job losses over the next 2 to 5 years. But enough about me with the preamble. I want to introduce my guests here, and Dr. Bhaskar.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and thank you for joining us here and helping us navigate this rather challenging conversation. And when we say challenging, one side of challenge is, of course, all the risks and uncertainties that all of us face. But the other side is this is an opportunity to get ahead of the problem. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity to not only share what we are learning, but also get some insights from those who are on the front lines of the workforce. So I'm delighted to have Johnny here. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing myself. People mostly know me. I'm Bhaskar Chakravorti, Dean of Global Business, and I'm also chair of Digital Planet, which is Fletcher's research center that has been studying how technology shapes lives and livelihoods around the world. We currently study 125 countries, and we track technology and its impact wherever it finds its way. So specifically, like everybody else who's concerned about technology, we've been spending a lot of time on the question of AI. And I'm very excited to present this work. And this work is a collective work with a large number of researchers who've been a part of this. And I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the incredible work that has been done by our team. So my co-authors, Christina Filipovic and Abidemi Adisa, alongside our graduate research associates, Max Agigyan, Turan Tashkin, Utsav Subramani, and we also had help from Elisa Torsh, Mitakshi Lakhani, Veer Poddar, and Shubhangi Thakur. So before we go any further, I'd just like you to put your hands together for this incredible team. And this is research that has been focused in the United States, and because we're Fletcher, eventually this research will take us around the world. We have looked at 784 occupations across every industry, across every metro and non-metro area in this country. So we mapped every single part of this country. So I will spend just 5 minutes giving you a quick background on some of the highlights of what we learned. But before we do that, let me give Johnny an opportunity to introduce himself.
So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Dean, for having us, and thank you for coming in from that great city of New York City. I'm Johnny Taylor. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of SHRM. The acronym is the Society for Human Resource Management. We're the world's largest HR association, representing 95% of the Fortune 500, 340,000 members. Offices were headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area, but 3 offices in India, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, so a global footprint focusing on all things work. By profession, I was once a lawyer. I'm a reforming lawyer, and then an HR professional in the Fortune 500, and then ultimately a CEO in the for-profit space, and then came over to the nonprofit world, which is SHRM, the association world. We're so excited to be working with Tufts and the dean here, because this is a topic that really has an interesting little cycle, and I'll be very quick with it, but we all remember the big date, November 30th of 2022, ChatGPT is introduced to the world. And I got to tell you, almost immediately there was this sense of, wow, this can make my life easier. She's laughing, she's like, I remember that day. And it's like, okay, this is exciting about what this tool can be. Shortly thereafter, it became very clear to human beings, to workers, that this was a threat. I mean, immediately, and there was panic. And then we saw an easing of the panic, and people said, yeah, but it's going to take a long time before this impacts me. This is maybe my grandchildren's problem. It's not my problem. Well, recently, the anxiety and the angst has come again, and workers who we study every day all over the globe are now very concerned about this. So that's why we are working with Tufts and very excited about this work. And I agree with you, it's a global issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you were ahead of the curve on studying the human resource fallout from this.
That's right.
So we've got incredible expertise and incredible research, and Dean Bhaskar, you're going to take us through some of the top takeaways.
Yeah, so just to set the table, to give you a sense of what we are learning. So what we did is recognize that the concern about AI is manifold. It's not just about jobs. There are many, many issues surrounding it, but that's a topic for another day. Just today, what we wanted to understand is what's going to be the impact on work. And there have been a number of different studies that have been coming out in the last few years trying to understand what is the likely impact. Most of the studies are pointing in a certain direction, which is reinforced by our work. But our work takes this to the next level, largely identifying not only which jobs are exposed, but also which jobs are vulnerable, because exposure could translate into augmentation. You become more productive, but vulnerable could mean your job is taken away and the machine is doing it in its place. And another major aspect is what's the economic impact. So what does it mean for a job to be lost? Not just to the individual, but to the community, to the society. Now, speaking of community and society, jobs are lost in not at a theoretical level or at a national level. Jobs are lost locally. So we wanted to understand what's the geographic footprint of this job displacement. And this is where, as Nick noted, a significant development of the study is to note that the parts of the country that are the major economic engines, Boston included, are also the parts of the country that are most vulnerable to this change that's happening. And this has enormous implications, not only from the perspective of policy and economic development and local action, but also political implications, because it's really the blue states that are going to be the biggest losers out of this. And the blue states are the ones that are producing much of the AI technology. And I don't need to remind anybody that we have a few months to go to a midterm and a couple of years to go to an election, a general election. We created a jobs risk index, this time focused on the United States, that looks at occupations, industries, regions, and states. And that's the bottom line picture, which is every part of the US mapped from blue to orange. Orange is, in Fletcher, orange is good. But on this map, orange is most exposed. Not only most exposed, but also most vulnerable. And if you go to the website, you can hover over any part of this, and you'll see exactly what percentage is the loss, what's the economic impact, and what are some of the other critical elements in terms of the major industries affected, and so on. This is the statewide picture. And you can see the blue states are likely to be the technologically more advanced states, whether it's Washington, Virginia, Massachusetts, California. California has a mix of industries, so that gives it a little bit of a hedge. But you can see where the major points of vulnerability are. Which occupations are likely to be most vulnerable? writers, most vulnerable, computer programmers, and web designers. And I can keep going because we've looked at 784 occupations. Which occupations are safest? If you're a dishwasher, if you're a surgical technologist, or if you're a floor finisher, you're in good shape. However, there's nuance to this. So coming back to the writer, several writers are likely to be displaced, but the writers who are not displaced are going to become a whole lot more productive. And their ability to earn an income based on that is going to go up. So what we're going to see is a displacement, but also a widening of a gap between those who have it and those who've been, basically separated from the status quo. Which parts of the country are most likely to see the shock? San Jose, Sunnyvale?
San Jose is number one.
San Jose is number one. So San Jose, Sunnyvale, that whole cluster, Silicon Valley, basically, is number one. Number 2 and 3 are the Washington, D.C. area and Boulder, Colorado. Okay. Where are you safe? You're safe if you're in Eagle Pass, Texas, in Puerto Rico, in Guyana, or in Elkhart, Indiana. Okay, of all the metro regions, these are the safest. There's a lot here in terms of the overarching learnings that we've got. I just want to highlight a few. There are going to be there's an economic impact from this. The United States is likely to lose the equivalent of the economy of Belgium in kind of the steady state. If agentic AI and several of the other major drivers of adoption pick up, the United States is likely to lose the economy of South Korea, just shy of $1.5 trillion within the next 5 years. A few things that I'd like to call out, I think, Nick, we were talking about earlier, or you mentioned there's 4 out of the 10 workers that are likely to be laid off are going to come from 5 states. So that's one. The second is there is a narrow band of so-called tipping point workers who are basically make the difference in terms of where the losses are. The reason why I call this out is that this helps us identify a narrower target from an intervention perspective. So if I'm SHRM, if I'm having a conversation at a business level, or if I'm having a conversation at the media level, or if I'm having a conversation in policy circles, these are the targets, both in terms of regions and occupations. And so there is good news here, which is we're identifying, where what the map of vulnerability looks like, but there are pinpoints. We can go in and do some surgical work in advance. And in terms of surgical work, these slides, we're more than happy to share them with you. We've also got all of this detail on the website, so feel free to check it out. So there are a number of different actions that we are recommending that policymakers take on, including actions that technologists and business leaders should be acting on today, and civil society as well. And civil society includes all of us. So all of us need to be aware of this. All of us need to act on it. You're doing the right thing, those of you who are at, rarefied environments like the Fletcher School, because you have access to the pathways to essentially being able to utilize this technology and be at the productive end of that curve. So you're doing the right thing, but we are here at the Fletcher School to do the right thing, not just for yourself, but for the community around you. So how do you make sure that there isn't that middle that gets pulled out? So that's where we are going to take our next conversation. I just wanted to note that in the past, automation and globalization, digitalization, caused Rosie the Riveter to, essentially look like this. This is a scene from a documentary on Youngstown, Ohio, a blue-collar city that never managed to do it, never managed to catch up. So now the question is, the white-collar worker, what is she going to do? She has access to lots of levers and tools that her blue-collar predecessor did not have. She has a LinkedIn network. She has political connections. She is informed, and she's going to be pissed and mad. And she's going to do something. And the question is what? And this is where we need to think about this. And as I want to kind of close this out, this is not all about doom and gloom because there is an enormous amount of transformational potential in this technology. AI, as we know, can enable things that we could not have done before. It could enable you to be a one-person unicorn because you could set up a company, you could do market research, you could run an entire company on agents, and you could potentially sell your products using artificial intelligence, maybe with a three-person group. And so you could do things that you could not have done before. So there are opportunities for entirely new developments to happen in the labor market. And hopefully we'll solve that problem between now and noon.
We're gonna figure it out
So
today.
between now and then, so let's let me sit down and
Thank you,
have
Dean.
a discussion. Okay.
By the way, was I the only person who early on felt like it was election night coverage? And he was like, from one of the news, he was like the blue map and the green map and everything. It's quite clever.
Well, Johnny, I have to ask, what's your reaction to this as a leader in the HR space and someone who's been studying this for years now? What do you make of this doom and gloom scenario, but also really smart people, top leaders and experts like yourselves, who are really alarmed by the situation we're heading towards?
So I'm an optimist, but I'm optimistic because of this research. The fact that we are actually exploring this and getting in the front of it means we have the opportunity to potentially change the trajectory of our higher educational institutions, be they traditional four-year, high-end universities like this one, or even our community college and other post-secondary options. The fact that we can begin right now as employers predicting, to some extent, the jobs that will exist 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, and preparing people for those, not just young people, but your 50-year-old who needs to work another 27 years or so, whatever, picking a number, to reskill, upskill, cross-skill so that they can compete in whatever the future job market is. That's why I'm so encouraged, is that, you know, if you wait until it happens, I'm from the great state of Florida, and I got to tell you, when they tell you that a hurricane's coming, the people who make it are the people who receive the warning, batten down, prepare themselves, buy groceries, et cetera, do whatever. The people who don't, the people who are in denial about it. And sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right. Oftentimes the hurricane gets right and then goes the other way, but sometimes it hits you dead on. And if you aren't prepared when the dead on hit, that's the problem. So I'm actually quite optimistic about it. Does it scare people? I mentioned at the outset in my comments, yes, it's fever pitch now. Employees are watching companies like Block and Jack Dorsey come in and wipe out 40% of their workforce.
And there is some debate about this. There is some debate like, did Block just overhire over the last 5 years? And are they using AI washing, it's called?
Maybe so, but what he said, Jack Dorsey, was AI. And so whether that's true or not kind of doesn't matter if people believe that that's the basis of it. But what was more concerning, as he said, and other CEOs are going to follow, which created a serious wake effect in the workforce. People
and the systemic aspect, but didn't mean to interrupt. The systemic aspect is that CEOs are also poked and prodded by Wall Street.
That's
so
right.
Wall Street is going to
Wall Street likes it.
Well, you saw it.
It's going to say, if Jack Dorsey laid off 40% of your workforce, why aren't you doing it?
And he got a 20% bump that day, or pick a number. That's exactly it.
Well, and you said, as you were presenting, a one-person unicorn. So a unicorn being a private company with a valuation of $1 billion or more, and they're getting smaller and smaller, the groups of people who can build these unicorns with venture capital funding. And is there going to be a one-person unicorn in the next 2 to 5 years like we're thinking about with this research?
It's completely, if it's not one person, maybe it's a 5%, but that those numbers can shrink, and the leverage that AI can provide those 5 people is enormous. And we all experience it. You can go to sleep, 5 minutes before you go to sleep, you enter a bunch of prompts on Claude, and the next morning you wake up, and within half an hour of your first cycle of sleep, it has done the work.
That's
right? So of those 50 people that you might have hired, now you need 4 people to check the work that Claude has done.
Yeah, and this is also science fiction. We were talking backstage about science fiction fandom and what kind of world we're headed towards. Is this like a cyberpunk world where everyone's got a mohawk on, and like there's this just big disruption, or more like a Blade Runner world, where it feels like ours, but it's very unevenly distributed in terms of who's flying around in some kind of one-person unicorn setup, and who is in the new Rust Belt, the new wired Rust Belt, like you said. I mean, you said backstage, Dean, that you're a science fiction fan.
Yeah, and the future is here, and unfortunately, it has been unevenly distributed. Throughout the build-up of the digital economy, and that unevenness is only going to grow with AI. No question about it.
Can I comment on this? It's really interesting. So because we're in all 50 states and it's really interesting to hear some of the people in, call it, West Virginia saying, so when we were displaced, it wasn't a big deal. When the coal jobs went away, you all didn't care, but now you do, because they're impacting you. So when this was a blue-collar problem, it wasn't a widespread societal problem.
Yeah.
But now that it's touching white-collar jobs, the highly educated, the affluent, the big cities, alas, the country has a problem. It's really, there's this very interesting tension amongst middle America flyover saying it's about time. Now you live our experience. I want to read something, a line that says, I picked this up from one of the articles. I wish I could specifically attribute it, but it said, the workers most at risk are among America's highest skilled, while the workers considered safe are amongst its lowest paid. It's really interesting because the reality is, the implication is, those of us who come out of institutions like this believe we're the highest skill. Well, I could argue that a really well-trained welder who knows what he or she is doing is pretty damn well highly skilled. But we have used the language to separate sort of the proletariat from the salariat, and it's really an interesting point where we're going to have discussions around work, not titles, not background, but contribution and value of jobs. And what is the degree of difficulty in doing the job? I can tell you some jobs that don't require college degrees at all are damn hard, and they require a high level of skill. So even the way we talk about this is going to force a societal conversation about what we value and what we don't. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I mean, this is a bit outside the scope of our conversation, but there's a war in the Middle East right now. There's a toll going up on the Strait of Hormuz, it looks like, and the physical commodity of oil and what it's worth, and the people who can refine that, a lot more valuable than it was a month ago.
Yeah, so I just want to note one thing here. In the larger discussion around AI, there have been calls in the past, and now a renewed set of calls by folks such as Bernie Sanders and AOC to pause the acceleration of AI. Now, what the war in Iran has done...
data centers to freeze construction.
Yeah, so there are many issues around AI, which we haven't even had a chance to touch on. However, the war in Iran, one thing it could do is not create a pause, but slow things down. Because a whole bunch of critical materials go through the Strait of Hormuz, sulfur and helium in particular. If they don't go through the strait, semiconductor production goes down, and semiconductor production is critical to ongoing building of data centers.
I also saw in Southeast Asia, there's plans to build data centers that are nuclear fueled,
right.
And those plans are also on hold or being reevaluated because of the interruption to the supply chain.
Yeah. So everything is connected.
Well, so it sounds like we're going back to a more physical world than the one that we've lived in since the deindustrialization we're talking about, when the blue-collar backbone of America turned into the Rust Belt. And we had all these high-tech jobs in cities like San Francisco and Boston. And now tech has advanced to such a point where the paradox that you point out in this report, so there's so many interesting paradoxes in this report, but they've made themselves obsolete with this AI technology, it's starting to look like.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to hear the perspective from Johnny in terms of, when people start looking for jobs, I want to be a floor finisher. Well, for one, a lot of people won't want to be a floor finisher if they got a college degree. And second, how many floor finishers do we need? Because floor finishers make an assumption that people are actually buying houses. And if their incomes aren't there to continue growth of the real estate market and so on and so forth, that's going to bring down the demand for floor finishers. So I'm just using that as one example. Of course, being a barista is another. So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I think to that point, then, if AI is capable of doing at least the promise of it is, how many mathematicians do you need? Mm-hmm. How many coders do you need? How many algorithms? So the same question is, ultimately, are we looking at a commoditization? Are we looking at supply and demand? I mean, the very questions could be asked of how many journalists do you need? How many writers is the questions, right? If, in fact, this technology can help us reduce the number of them. I think we might be having the same conversation. Fair?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. But we are in the presence of a celebrity journalist.
That's right.
An entire article.
Journalists will be fine. That's what your data says, right?
That's right.
Andy Warhol once said, in the future, everyone would be famous for 15 minutes. Right. So maybe in the AI era, everyone will be employed for 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, possible. We may not need to work for more than 15 minutes. But I just want to also note that in this entire conversation, of course, we are trying to squeeze in a lot in a very short period of time. People have hearkened back to previous major transformations: Industrial Revolution, electrification, railroads, and so on and so forth. We can keep going, right? And people said, well, what happened then? So in the case of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people were displaced from their jobs. And guess what? They found new jobs. When spreadsheets came out, you would have thought that would be the end of accounting. Right. No, there are more accountants today than before. So the argument has been that these tools essentially then bring prices down, make work easier, that raises demand, and then gives people new occupations, and then it frees people up to do new things. So there is, of course, light at that end of that tunnel. The question is, we need to build the tunnel to get to the light.
So you're still optimistic we'll get through the tunnel?
I do believe there's a civilizational capacity to adapt to technological change. We've always done this. From the Gutenberg press, which is more recent than earlier transformations, we've always done this. So the issue is, how do we build that tunnel? And we aren't having a serious conversation about that. And that tunnel could be a long one. So the Industrial Revolution, there was a notion called the Engels pause.
Right.
So it takes 40 to 50 years for the systems to adjust, for people to find new occupations. Now here, we are not having a sufficiently robust and granular discussion about what should we do? What should industry do? What should the HR industry do? What should policymakers do? And specifically in terms of policymakers, Washington, D.C. ain't doing anything. So it's up to the local policymakers.
But Washington, D.C. is talking about it. I can tell you, just gave congressional to Senate testimony before the Aging Committee the other day, and every one of the senators is talking about it, in part because of the realization people vote, not machines, not algorithms. So ultimately, the pressure is on from a pure political standpoint that if people don't have jobs, they're not going to be happy. It's what you started with, like they won't treat you well in these blue states if in fact they're out of work. I did want to point to one other thing though, and it's this idea, I keep talking about the West Virginias of the world, but we have real experience that says when we attempted to move coal miners to coders, it failed miserably. So our country hasn't done a great job of reskilling, even if we know what the other job. We knew the coal miner job is going to be eliminated. We knew that there was, remember 5 years ago, we were all going to coding academies and pushing our children to that, right? At that time, we thought these are the jobs of the future. Yet the unemployment rate in the state of Virginia is stubbornly high, and despite all of our best efforts from an industry side, from politicians and policymakers side, those people are still unemployed. So I just want to make sure that we learn from that and that we don't sort of live in Pollyanna, which is we know what the jobs are going to be and we can just train these people into these new jobs. Recent history says it didn't quite work that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Rosie the Riveter is not employed.
Right.
Can you share a little more, Johnny, about what you're hearing in these D.C. congressional circles about behind closed doors? Not to name names necessarily, but the vibe that when you talk to senators and congresspeople.
So it really falls into two buckets. There's the group that are saying we need to explore things like universal basic income. perhaps these jobs will never come back at scale. Right now, the U.S. workforce is 171 million jobs, and maybe 10 years from now, we're going to do just fine on 150 million jobs. Maybe that's just the reality, and there's a structural shift that has occurred. And so what do we do with 20 million people who are ready, willing, able to work, but don't have jobs to go to? That's the first, they live in that camp. Then there's the other side of the camp that says we're simply going to slow this down. Like, if you know, what's the town?
The Bernie AOC camp, maybe?
Well, I won't. You asked me not to say names, and I won't do it. But I will say that that is the group that sort of, an example of that is the state of New Jersey, where you can't pump your own gas. Mm-hmm. Sure, you could self-serve, but they won't do it because that will take a lot of people who are currently...
It's just the two states. It's New Jersey and Oregon.
New Jersey and Oregon.
The only two.
But the reality is there can be regulatory policy interventions that will slow this down. Just because the technology exists to eliminate these jobs, we may just prevent it. So I think there are people who are sitting in those, I know there are people in those two camps who are discussing what's the best way to manage this.
Yeah, we've seen this in the case of Hollywood, right?
That's right.
I mean, movies I don't need Nicole Kidman anymore. I'm sorry. People can create.
I still do, I'm sorry.
Yeah, even though.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, okay, all right, okay. Sorry, sorry I brought up specifically. But, OpenAI just killed Sora. But, there are lots of tools, where you can recreate Nicole Kidman and whoever else you want to have.
There's a Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt video.
Yeah, right. I mean, it can all be done. However, the industry kind of said, no, we're going to draw a line. So we are going to see, such localized efforts coming up, and that's exactly the point of our research, that the action is going to happen at the local level, and then eventually rise up to Washington.
I mean, this is also outside the scope, but these lawsuits against
Yes.
Meta around social media being harmful to children, it's taken about 20, 30 years for that to come down.
The new tobacco.
The new big tech is new big tobacco, and so are we at the beginning of a 20-year cycle before AI and data centers face some kind of reckoning?
You want to go first, Johnny? Well, I feel so much of this is going to be driven by a combination of political shifts and the economic motive. Right, so to the extent that AI translates into cost savings for organizations, whether it's companies or public and social sector organizations, we're going to pursue that. Money always talks. The other is productivity, and people are motivated by productivity gains. So there's going to be a tension, and so as inequalities grow. There's going to be this middle that's going to sink. The low end jobs, the low end people who are lowly paid, they're not likely to be as affected because they're the floor finishers and the baristas. It's the middle that's going to be affected.
The middle.
But that middle is a very powerful political constituency. Right. So then the question is, where do they?
People in the suburbs.
Right.
The middle.
Yeah. And then the question is, where do they go? Which direction do they go? Do they go to the local political representative, or at the national level? And who among the major parties is going to speak up for them? And here it's a little bit unclear because we are adrift, at least in the United States, we're adrift in terms of a political messaging. Regarding the conversations that are happening on Capitol Hill, sadly, these are also the senators who asked Mark Zuckerberg, how do you make money?
That's
right. They got a quick tutorial in the last couple of years, but they haven't got the tutorial in terms of what's coming, the hurricane that's hitting them. And unfortunately, when that comes, it's going to take them a while to translate that into policy.
Well, their voters, though, are yelling at them now. Like, it's a fever pitch. When when a significant number of people lose their jobs in sectors and geographies, as your research indicates, believe me, they're talking to everyone from the mayor, city council, all the way to their federal legislature, because that person has a district office. So although they're in Washington, D.C., once they've closed a session, they then go back to their local markets and they are hearing it. All hell is breaking loose in many of these markets, because as you said, the only two things that are an existential threat to human beings, it is a threat to their lives, which COVID presented to us, and a threat to their livelihoods, which AI is presenting to them. Is presenting, and you can see this almost the same level and intensity of response to the AI threat, because people need to be able to provide for themselves.
Could I make a point as an educator on this issue? Because we talk about reskilling and so on as a critical bridge to where we need to go. So education is an important part of it. I'm not very worried about our students here, because our students they have grown up in a pre-AI world, and they're beginning to get smart at using Claude or whatever it is, so they can interrogate the model intelligently. What I'm really worried about is the kid who's in 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade.
Yes.
These are the kids who haven't grown up in a pre-AI world. They are getting very smart in terms of using digital technologies, and they are much smarter than their teachers. Right. And the teachers are a little bit at a loss as to how to deal with this technology. So these kids and their entire, I'm vastly generalizing, and I remember when I was in 6th grade, my entire purpose in life was to do as little work as possible to just get by. So I'm going to offload my brain to the AI. So speaking of cognitive loss, we don't have a policy on the education front. And by the way, we're about to eliminate the Department of Education. So has it been eliminated already? I haven't kept track.
It's happening bit by bit.
It's happening. Okay, it's a slow-moving pace. But this is an issue. Where is the next generation of Fletcher students going to come from, or students in any of the other great universities?
And I'm going to layer on top of that, even Fletcher or not, even if they come right to the workplace, if they can't actually solve problems, they lack critical thinking skills. Right. And again, there's some really critical thinking skills that a plumber has to engage in. Like, they've got to figure out where that leak is coming from when it's not very obvious, right? The cause of it. So you fix it, but you don't know what caused it. So critical thinking, I really am concerned as an employer, someone who represents employers.
I've heard that phrase so much in the last year covering this beat, and I ask panels of experts, do you feel good about where we are with critical thinking in the workforce? And I don't get good responses.
Well, we were concerned before AI, and now we're really concerned because, to your point, I'm a lawyer by training, as you know, and it was interesting. The other night I had to do some research, and we're hearing these. Yes, you can go to some of these AI tools and draft a total brief, right? And it will cite cases as if they're legitimate, et cetera. But there's nuance there. You have to be able to understand that makes sense, but in this context, this doesn't make sense. Only a human at this point, perhaps when we get to AGI or something else that can solve for that, but at this point, a human being can put together a credible brief and submit it to a court and be totally wrong. That means we still must have human beings who have cognitive critical thinking skills, and it worries me at really elite institutions like Tufts, or frankly, just solving basic problems in my house for me when I need someone to help me fix it.
Yeah. Does that, I know we're running short on time here. 2 more questions for you guys. One is, does that give you pause and around these big projections of millions of jobs being wiped out, but then the kind of the bluntness of these tools still, where they're so sycophantic that they'll give you exactly what you're asking for and leave out the really important thing that would add the nuance that only the human can provide? Like, does that mean that this is an overhyped concern? And then the second is, there is a glass half full scenario where these tools encourage a lot of entrepreneurialism, maybe in the blue collar spaces, maybe elsewhere. Lots of small businesses can outsource, their receptionist to an AI. There can be an AI that reads their email and schedules meetings for them. And we could see a boom of small business entrepreneurialism. So those are my two my two last thoughts for you guys.
I want to take that last one because I'm intrigued by it. We talk about white collar and blue collar, and there are pink collar jobs as they've been dubbed. I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's what they've been described as. That does concern me. If it disproportionately eliminates all, I mean, think about who generally are in the receptionist, secretarial support jobs. We have finally gotten to a point where women are reaching some parity in the workplace in terms of representation and labor participation, I should say. If in fact we do something like that disproportionately hits professions that are female dominated, what does that mean for us as well? So there, again, this is very inextricably intertwined with there's industry and there's societal issues that we've got to solve for that do give me concern. The easiest answer in the world is we can just outsource all of these jobs to a computer. But working title of an essay that I'm working on now is Displacement, Where'd the Humans Go? Like, the real question is, okay, then what do we do with those women who want to work and were working and doing a great job? What do you do with them now?
What do you do with them now?
So I wanted to address, Nick, the earlier part of your question, which is AI. The output it produces is kind of like a B to B plus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even a C, maybe.
Or even a C. I'm an easy grader, I guess. but I was a fan of AI back in 1991. And those of you who know the history of AI, that was squarely in the middle of the so-called second AI winter, when AI wasn't cool. Okay. And I used to work with a colleague who was the father of one of the founding fathers of neural networks. Okay, so that's where I got my enthusiasm from AI from. So AI's development went like this, mostly down, and then suddenly, as you said, November 2022, boom, exploded out of the box. Today, if you look at the state of what AI output is, compare it to what it was 6 months back, it's almost night and day.
Yeah.
The quality of standard models is improving. Then you add agents. Then you add additional, capabilities layered on top of that. These capabilities are growing at an exponential rate. So that C level output is going to become B plus, is going to become, even better. And most of us aren't really B plus people. The median individual is kind of B.
Well, this is the messy middle we were talking about.
That's right.
Yeah.
That scares me the most. It's the celerity. It's how quickly this is happening that gives us pause. Even if Washington or local government is trying to respond to it, like, this is serious. And so I'm really honestly grateful for the work that you all are doing here, because this is not a 3 or 5 year problem. We don't have that much time. I keep using the metaphor of the hurricane, but it's like not far offshore because of the advancements, how quickly, and the fact that you are now talking B plus when human beings aren't even operating at scale at B plus level is really scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know that you probably want some questions from the audience. I just also wanted to note that because we are the Fletcher School, we look at everything through a global lens. Mm-hmm. So this, our starting point with the United States. Every zip code in the US was the first thing that we wanted to map. However, everything we're learning here has global implications. So all the white-collar job displacements we were talking about, imagine the implications for people in the Philippines, people in India, people in Kenya, people around the world who are relying on the white-collar connections on the global network. What's going to happen to them? And those were some of the economies that people were extremely hopeful of. Right. So these have much wider consequences, in addition to the Strait of Hormuz, which we didn't even talk about. All right.
I think that's a great prompt. If we have any questions from the audience, I know we're running a little short on time. Does anyone out there have a question for us? Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Catherine Walsh. I'm a student here at Fletcher. I was trying to think through, you talk a lot about what is the action.
I'm sorry, could you just use a mic because, yeah.
Hello, I'm Catherine Walsh. I'm a student here at Fletcher. When talking about what action we can actually take, I was really inspired by the idea of doing it on the local level. But if I'm, a citizen from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I'm trying to go to my local representatives and say, you need to be doing something to protect jobs. How am I supposed to present that to local leaders when at the same time they're trying to get these companies to invest to help their city grow and to help, expand the business opportunities within the city. How do you balance those two challenges?
Well, if you got that, you'd be president of the United States. No, it's because it's really complicated. What we're attempting to do at SHRM is when we talk about workers, there are no workers if there are no employers. So we're taking the space that we have to speak with employers and say, what's conscious capitalism about? What's your moral obligation to ensure that people, at least in this country and then ultimately globally, can work and enjoy the dignity of work if they're willing and able to do so? So what we are now doing is speaking with companies like Microsoft, as an example. Kathleen Hogan, who was their head of HR 2 years ago, hosted us at an event, and she famously said, we have a pretty good idea because we developed 3 and 5 year strategic plans of what jobs are going to go away 3 years from now within our work organization and what are going to be the new jobs. We actually kind of have an idea. So if we could back into that and say, this is our current 200,000-300,000 person workforce, we know that 10% of them are at risk. What do we do now? What do we start doing right now to signal, to nudge, to get them to retrain, even if we have to pay for it, and even if they ultimately don't stay at Microsoft, but ultimately go somewhere else? We're an exporter of talent. What's our moral obligation? Because we're making a ton of money. Maybe that's the pressure, is we should get companies to be mindful of, if you have a 2 to 3 year, a 3 or 5 year strategy, you know what that means for people, then let's have some specific interventions around cross-skilling, upskilling, reskilling to respond to that, so that at the end of this, whatever it is, hopefully those people have a higher chance of being employed somewhere.
Well, to connect those dots too, they've got a 3-5 year plan, and then these models are advancing so fast, to the dean's point, that they, halfway through that plan, they say, we don't need all these positions we thought we would need.
Believe it or not, if you're someone like Microsoft, and this is not a commercial for Microsoft, but your 3 to 5 year plan contemplates what it does. So like as you said it, he was studying AI in 1991. Hell, I didn't even know what AI was 3 years ago. So really smart people who are developing strategy at these tech companies actually can kind of...
But are they being surprised by the exponential progress, would you say?
I don't know. What do you think? I don't think they're fully surprised. Maybe it's accelerated a little faster than they, and to their glee, by the way. I think they're happy about it because this is what they do. But to the young lady's question, is Catherine right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is, I would not have a one-pronged strategy, which is to put pressure on your politicians. I think it's a dual-pronged strategy, which is talk to major companies and say you can and must do better. If you know and this is your tool. Hell, you know what it's going to do ultimately, or you have a pretty good idea. You have a better idea than we have. So if you know that, then let's get in the front of it and make sure that we give people the ability to enjoy the dignity of work 3-5 years from now, when whatever happens, or 12 months from now.
Yeah, I absolutely think it has to be a multi-pronged approach. It can't be solved by the politicians alone. Private sector technology needs to play an active role. However, the private sector has a bottom line, has the Wall Street analysts, their demands to meet, has shareholders' demands to meet. So for them, if AI produces efficiency for a lower cost, you can generate a higher revenue line. That's always better. So to the extent that I'm retraining or I'm investing in my workers, if that investment then becomes, an externality that others benefit from, that may not be the ideal outcome for a lot of companies, and every company is under pressure. So we do need to have sort of multiple approaches. I also suggest a third approach, which is the average citizen. Each one of us can feel empowered, because the same AI that allows you to create a one-person unicorn is also a one-person political and influence campaign. So it gives you the tools to reach further and faster. Of course, since many people have that, there's going to be noise. So you have to figure out how to rise above the noise. But part of the noise is hopefully aiming in the right direction, which is, we're all affected by the increasing inequalities and the decline of, the social compact, as it were.
One other factor is the courts. The courts will play an outsized role in this, and we're seeing it in the cases that you said, the Metas and the others. I think we're going to see some of this being tested in the courts as well. So the lawyers will play their role as well.
Any more questions? Yes, in the middle.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Layla. I'm a student at Harvard. As AI becomes more commonplace, employers are trying to figure out how best practices to adopt AI into the working and using it as a tool to maybe help whatever day-to-day tasks that you're doing. However, when that happens, also comes an expectation that you might have to work faster, get more things done, and I think that could lead to this odd thing where I think there's a lot more pressure being placed on workers to be more efficient. So I guess how should we maybe encourage employers to, yes, adopt best AI practices within the workplace, but then also still respect what's that balance where you still don't want to pressure the people that are working for you because you have this additional tool, or would that mean just limiting it altogether, or I guess how do you strike that balance, because it could help people, but then it also may lead to this expectation that things need to get done faster.
Yeah, so that's such a great question. Remind me of your name again. Layla. So it's interesting. Many of the tools that we currently employ within organizations, at least first level, it hasn't been done to eliminate your job. It's been to free you up from the stuff you didn't want to do anyway. The tedium. I remember I started my legal practice and having to go into a room and look through volumes and volumes of books, or sit in a document production room and review boxes and boxes of documents to find the smoking gun. I didn't want to do that anyway. That's not value-added, interesting, strategic work. So at least as it currently stands, what many of the organizations are doing is saying, let's just free you up from 30% of the stuff you didn't want to do anyway, and that the machine can do more effectively, efficiently, and probably more accurately because you didn't want to do it anyway, right? If we are simply filling that time with more value-added work, great. Your point is, if we do that and then want even more out of you, then it leads to burnout. And we know that human beings are not machines, and so we're very mindful of the fact that you can't push people to work at maximum, productivity for 40, 50, 60 hours a week. That tedium, that work that kind of was mindless, was actually a break for your brain in between. So I can tell you, every conversation that I'm having with CHROs and CHROs are chief HR officers, by the way, if just in case, especially for the students, that they're having is don't now use that 30% of efficiency and then force people to give you 50% of productivity, because that will burn your people out, and we're very mindful of that.
Yeah, so I'm just to provide a bit of a different perspective on this. As I reflect on the lawsuit that just got a lot of publicity in the media, despite the fact that they were fined $6 million. I mean, $6 million for
Meta.
For Meta.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a joke.
Yeah, it's less. That's way less than.
Yeah, but of course, that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be more lawsuits and so on. However, the lawsuit was about minors and about children being addicted to these platforms. We're all addicted, right? I mean, everybody's constantly the break in a conversation and you pull out your phone, right? And so and you walk around any place, everyone's got their heads down. And there's an expectation that these phones are going to follow you no matter where you are. If you're at work all the time. So, Layla, your concern is very well placed. Now it's not just the phone, because your employer knows that before you go to bed, you can put in a prompt into Claude, and as soon as you wake up in the morning, the work will be done. So the employer will be leaving you a message at 5:30 a.m., kind of saying, do you have the output? Because I know you put in a prompt at midnight the night before. By the way, Claude has given you an answer in 5 minutes. You may not be able to sleep because you know that the answer is right there waiting on your phone. So this is bound to happen. It's bound to happen. As human beings, we get a dopamine rush every time time an output comes back from a system in which I've given it some kind of a command. So unfortunately, these are the kinds of conversations that need to be had. I'm very glad you raised this issue because we're not spending enough time discussing this. And I'm so glad we have Johnny and others who are talking to chief HR officers around the country and elsewhere to actively engage in these issues, because this is a serious problem.
Let me just comment on that. Just one, and so violently agree with the dean here. What I would say is back in the day for the students, I would have worked all night. So at least I go to sleep and wake up to it. There was no sleep. You hear this in big firms like Goldman Sachs, the major law firms, the big law. You actually didn't go to sleep because there was no Claude to do it. So I do think it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And that's the point, is these things are intended to enhance human productivity and life, not necessarily. So it's better than it was. Perfect, I know it's not, and why we're having these conversations.
Well, I want to ask for a show of hands from our younger audience members around this idea of nostalgia for an analog age back in like the mythical 1990s before these phones came along. Like, how many of you out there are nostalgic for a pre-wired world, an analog world? About half, maybe?
That's interesting.
Half, because we cover this a lot. We're seeing this. I mean, there's TV shows that are big. This love story show about John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. But Johnny, I think that's a really, really interesting perspective, that it was not a fantasy world.
It was not a fantasy.
You were expected to work all night if you were a top corporate lawyer.
That's it. That's it. No, and so that's, listen, I'm the first, I was the #3 lawyer at Blockbuster. Okay, so what does that tell you about how old I am? But the idea
it's very 1990s.
Very 1990s. But I can tell you, there was no fun to get to a Blockbuster on a Friday night and all of the video that you wanted was gone, right? It just was no fun. And so, but then you complain about, oh my gosh, there's 300 channels right now with 1 million different movies that are like, it's never right, I don't think, right?
Yeah, it's never right. How are we on time? We have another question here, actually.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mika van der Wansum. I work here at the Fletcher School in the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy. My question is about education and any recommendations, specific recommendations you might have for what we teach Fletcher students in terms of AI use. Are there specific things that you'd recommend, or should these be required for everyone, no matter what field you go into, or any thoughts on what's needed?
So Mika, as you know, we've been having an ongoing debate and discussion, and the line keeps shifting in terms of how much AI to embrace in our day-to-day pedagogy at the Fletcher School. There was a point when syllabi would say explicitly, no AI, never. If you do it, you shall be hanged in the public square. Now, we've moved away from that, and now the general caveat is, we encourage you to use AI, but when you use it, be transparent about it. Right. And then there are some situations where we expect even greater levels of transparency. If you submitted a project, an assignment, let us know what were the prompts you used and specifically the sequence of steps. So we understand the methodology. Just like when you're giving an answer, you have to explain how you did your calculations on the underlying models. So I believe that's where we are headed, and we're going to continue to move the line further and further in that direction. Simultaneously, I will note that last year we often have employers come in and talk about what they're looking for from our graduates. So we had a team from BCG, several of our alumni who were at BCG, come and speak about the work they do, and one of the questions we had for them was, what's the single biggest, most important skill you're looking for from Fletcher graduates or graduates from any of the great graduate schools in our area? They said their ability to use AI.
That's right.
Okay, so if you're going to be hanged in the public square for using AI, we are not doing our students any favors because then we're not preparing for the job market. And this is the tension, because we don't want them to work in a world where it's all done by AI, because you have to develop those critical thinking skills, the ability to interrogate the system, and the ability to actually use AI as a trampoline or a springboard to go even higher in terms of the quality of the work that you do, to reach into further frontiers of knowledge, research, organizing, modeling, and so on and so forth, and creativity. That's what we need to do here at the Fletcher School. Now, here's one little problem. Our students are much better at AI than our faculty.
That's right.
So who's going to teach whom? That's a conversation that we need to engage in.
Should you start hiring 21-year-old professors, maybe?
We might need that.
That's funny. I would add just one little type. So there's a line that you hear a lot in industry amongst the employer community, and that is, AI is not going to come for your job. Someone proficient in AI is going to get your job. And so if that, from the industry side, bringing handcuffing or I don't know what, someone by not allowing your graduates to know how to use the latest in AI tools could hurt them in the interview process, selection process, but definitely in the hiring process, as a part of the hiring process, that we will ask you to demonstrate your ability to use the latest tools. Plus, we want you to critically think. So there you have it.
I just have a question referring to the whole block layoffs, which was really interesting when that happened. There was an editorial, I think in the Times, from a woman who was actually in their HR
Yes.
team, who basically said, and this is something I'm just wondering really, and by the way, I'm a big admirer of SHRM.
Thank you.
I've admired what you guys do. But in terms of assessing, what are the skills that are unique that AI can't do? Because that's what she was talking. She said, my job, I guess she did like events planning
That's
or
right.
something, and
Yes.
she had to like locate talent for blah. And she's just like, yeah, AI can do it, but I'm going to do it much better. So there's a flip side to this in terms of like these layoffs. Oops, we laid off all this talent, and now we have to hire it back, right? So I'm wondering in terms of, are certain types of talent, so I'm just wondering in terms of SHRM, are you looking into, like, how do we assess those kind of special, nuanced skills that human beings just are going to do better? I mean, AI can say, yeah, these are the top movie stars, but she said, I know the ones you want to work with.
That's that part, the ones you want to work. That is so fast. I'm going to give a quick answer to that.
Yeah.
We are right now working on a phrase, and I don't have it sorted yet because we have a research team back of really smart PhDs who came from schools like this who are working on it back at the shop. We're looking for those uniquely human job traits and characteristics. And when we're able to identify those and actually articulate those, then we can go into companies and say, these are uniquely human tasks. And that's what we're working on right now. And on the other side, the researchers at great universities like this one are working on what can be automated and what is automatable. Well, we're going to say what is uniquely human. And that's research that we're working on right now.
Well, I would just want to add, I talked to a lot of chief impact officers, chief impact officers and people officers, and this is kind of a trade secret that's developing right now.
That's right.
These companies are figuring this out, and they don't want to share it. They are getting to the bottom of, there are human skills, uniquely human skills, and we're just going to keep these internal because that gives us an advantage in the marketplace.
Amen. Yes.
And you're helping with that.
That's right. And that's why we're doing it, because they are doing it.
So I do have a question on that, Nick. You have the classic, Dilbert image of a company
Or office space.
or office, or whatever. Office. Pick your favorite, office satire. And much of corporate America, the corporate world, and by corporate I don't necessarily mean private sector. It's even worse in the public sector, which is you just have a set of routines that people go through. Even the language you use, that's also satirized. The language either it comes from the corporate world or it comes from consultants. And it's all kind of the same code, the code that's used. So when we say something that's uniquely human, organizations don't value something that's uniquely human. You have to, basically conform to a codified structure. And by the way, AI is much better at conforming to a codified structure than humans are. So I wonder whether there's an inherent paradox, and I really wonder
right.
if you, as a journalist, can poke them even further. Kind of said, no, I want you to reveal one example of a uniquely human thing that
It's
you guys
tough.
are.
I mean, I would ask Johnny to help me on this reporting mission. I feel like they don't want to share what they're learning about what makes us uniquely human. And I think a lot of this AI debate, it's so emotional because it's a proxy for how you feel about capitalism. Like, will we be able to come up with enough good jobs 2 to 5 years down the road? And what does it mean to be human when this thing can spit out really good writing instantly? So it's very emotional.
So I'll give you, going back to the example, that was a great, block example was great. So if you're an events manager and you can input a couple of variables, I need an event, I need a hotel that will host 500 people that's available on these dates in a city that has a beach. Like, you can put all of those elements in and put together a prompt for it. And yes, AI can give you that. What the human being in that events department knows is, yeah, but that manager at that facility, that property manager, is a total jerk. You don't want to work with them. They're going to overcharge you here. They're going to make your life horrible. And only a human being knows that now. And that human being might be able to say, notwithstanding the fact that he, the manager of that property, is a jerk, I know how to charm him. I went to school with his daughter. I can say, like, there's these things that only human beings know. And that's an example. We host large events. Our largest conference is 26,000 people. There are a whole bunch of cities we could go to, but there are some we won't, because my events manager knows exactly the innards of the organization. And you're like, you don't want to screw around with them. That's uniquely human.
I think this is a growth market.
It is.
This is kind of the frontier that we're going to have to jump over when all of this automatable work gets eaten up.
Automatable. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, Wendy?
I have a quick question. So I am a PR manager in DC, so in 3 years I should have no job, according to the index. I went to 2 summits. Axios had one, BlackRock had one. I think about 9 speakers said we need to invest in trades, we need skills, but what if I don't want to be an electrician or work in the data center? I want to go to college. If you were a freshman in college today, I want to know what your major would be, all 3 of you on stage.
Wow.
Okay.
What a great question.
Wow, putting me on the spot.
Yes.
I think Dean, as our host here, you should start with this tough question.
Well, for background, I think the statistic is that the unemployment rate among college graduates today is greater than the unemployment rate overall.
Yes.
9%.
Yeah.
9%.
Did I get that right?
Yep,
That
9%.
and this is a highly unusual situation
Yeah,
to be
Senator
in.
Mark Warner
That's
said
right.
it'll be 35% in a couple of years.
Okay. So in the past, the belief was you go to college and that sort of puts you in a higher, on a trajectory to higher income. So coming back to your question, what should I study? I would argue that you should be studying, exactly what you would have been doing 5 years back or 10 years back, because a large part of foundational college education is about building, that combination of skills that add up to critical thinking. And critical thinking can be developed through a combination of exposures, and American universities at a certain level are exceptionally good at that. No matter how much they've been beaten down, they are some of the best in the world. Now, I really worry about the next layer down, and then the community colleges, which are, the places, the starting point for a lot of people. And unfortunately, there you are headed in the direction of floor finishing, and actual, human work, physical work. Those are some of the areas that need to be emphasized for somebody who's entering there. At the higher end of the education system, I would continue to study exactly what I would have studied 10 years back, because critical thinking is ultimately that very human piece that's not going to go away. And a classic liberal arts education, even if you're a physics major or a double E major, is going to be valuable.
So undergrad, I do philosophy, logic, those sorts of majors, coupled with journalism or any form of writing. No one's going to read these thick books anymore. I was trying to get my daughter to read Moby Dick the other day, and she said not interested. Like, she's just not going to read it. So I think you've got to be able to get to it quickly, and that's what journalists do phenomenally well. Take fairly complicated, like deep data, and so that people can and will read it. So I think some combination of the critical thinking skills of logic and philosophy and religion and other liberal arts, very strong liberal arts education coupled with being able to write it, is what I would do undergrad. And then law school, I'd do what I did. Graduate school, I'd do law school because of the critical thinking skill there. Most lawyers, I think the numbers, I could be off now, but I think it's like 60% of people went to law school aren't practicing law. That was not the goal. The goal was the deep critical thinking. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, my wife is a journalist, and she has a law degree that she never used in practice. We're not here to talk about me, but we do cover for Fortune the revenge of the liberal arts major.
Yes.
And I would do more liberal arts. I was a history major, double major in drama, actually. But liberal arts, I wish I had
We don't need any more drama in the workplace right now. They've majored in that, trust me.
Maybe don't do that. But also, I think the double-pronged answer is to use these tools and educate yourself using AI, because it can read much more than you can, much faster, and bring you to things you would never have discovered otherwise. So I think develop your own brain and then use these tools and get fluent in them and see how you can just self-educate as a lifelong project. And I think a lot of my career in journalism, I just read 50 books a year. I'm a bit of a freak that way.
Wow.
Just try to feed my brain all the time because I'm always growing.
So I just wanted to just add a line from our research, which is those who study AI and analyze AI are at the bullseye in terms of the jobs that are going to be displaced. So my entire team is highly vulnerable. AI is going to rewrite history, largely because the ability to be a historian actually has gone up thanks to AI. So that's part of the paradox. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, my father is writing his memoirs recently, which concerned me because I'm like, are you dying? Is something wrong? But I helped him use Claude to come up with these, and I think he wrote a really beautiful, well-researched book, and that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago.
There you go.
So a lot of amateur historians will be born.
Yeah, I noticed that actually both of you mentioned, like, you mentioned your daughter and Moby Dick. You mentioned reading, 50 books a year? Both having to do with reading books. And I'm wondering, to what extent is that, whether from like an intellectual or cultural standpoint, to what extent might that be sort of an indicator of like where people's minds are as a society, for lack of a better way of putting it? Like, is that going to be an important, like, is reading long form books going to be like a sort of a key skill where it's like, okay, you actually have to like sit down and think about this?
Yeah, I'd love to get
Are you influenced by the fact that this room is lined with books, long form books, as you put it?
Maybe we're preaching to the choir here.
Right.
I think so, but I think you have to be open-minded about this and think about how much you read your phone. Like, it's true what the dean said, that we're all addicted at all ages to our phones, but if you think about it, these are reading dissemination devices. Like, I know that you can be on TikTok and Instagram, but a lot of people use their phones to read a lot more news than they ever did before. So my whole career, the news industry's been dying, but more people are reading news every day than any time before in history. And so I actually read books on my phone. I have a library app, and I get ebooks from the library for free. If I don't like it after 5 pages, I didn't buy it. I could just get another one. I've amplified my own reading because I'm not judgmental about the fact that it's on my phone. But other people say that that's terrible. But I say, like, be open-minded about whatever you're reading.
And I'm just a huge advocate of going back to the basics in some ways. I think that is so critical. Just the tactile part of things is the word of touching and moving. I think there's such to be learned there. Now, do you have the time in this fast-paced world to read 5 Moby Dicks a year? Maybe not. But you should put 1 or 2 down. And particularly as a part of your formal education, a well-educated person has to read. And some of the things we do can't be done quickly. You actually have to sit down and teach your brain to slow down and go through stuff that you don't want to actually. It's not even interesting, but it doesn't matter that it's not interesting. To solve complex problems requires patience and just what's that word when you don't let up on something when you're but you have to dig your way through it. And I think there's a word there that I'm not coming up with.
Stick-to-itiveness.
Stick-to-itiveness, that's right. And I think we've lost some of that. And so what you find in the workplace is, as long as I can get to the answer quickly, I'm good. The second it becomes, I'm not moving at the pace that I'm used to going, then I'm not interested. And some of the thorniest problems require that you slow down sometimes and go back and read it again to get through it. So we've got to get young people in particular used to, accustomed to having to do that. And if they've not had to do it, that's a muscle they've not used, and then we as employers really suffer.
So I wanted to go back, Johnny, to the analogy of the hurricane that you raised. I mean, a lot of weather forecasters, they often go to extremes. In Boston, it's not hurricane. It's kind of snowmageddon,
right?
And then you realize it's just like a half an inch, and then you say, oh, these folks always overstate, what the weather's going to be. Except this year, it was exactly as bad as they said it was going to be. But what we are suggesting here is that it is a snowmageddon. That's coming. And I say this not to be a crisis monger, but out of crises come innovation. So if what's happening right now coming back to the Strait of Hormuz and that the battle that's unfolding across the region, now we're seeking help from the Ukrainians,
right?
To bring their drone technology, their AI and drone technology, to wage a war. So, and that came out of a crisis. Right. So I do think it's good to elevate a sense of a crisis, but to do that early. And that's the entire purpose of this conversation. Yes. That's the entire purpose of our research.
Well, to torture your metaphor a bit, because we had a couple blizzards in New York this year, you maybe get firewood if you have a fireplace.
Right.
You go to the grocery store, you get stuff that you don't need to go outside for 2 or 3 days. You just make a plan for the big blizzard that's coming, and then, you're stuck inside. It's not pleasant, but you do get through it, and you do change the way you're acting.
Yeah.
Here. Thank you again.
I think that's a great note to end on.
This is amazing.
Of course.
Research.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you if you worked on it.
Okay.